Hey everybody, welcome to Naturalistics, a podcast designed to help you become a better naturalist through questions, observations, and storytelling, the three components which make up the Naturalistics Triforce.
Triforce.
My name is Stefan.
My name is Matt. What's up?
Today on Naturalistics, I'm going to be sharing some stories from Algonquin Park. First, Matt's got a little Naturalistics update for us.
So, yeah, this is episode 4. Super excited to continue on 4 months in because we're doing once-a-month podcasts. We're really committed to keeping it once a month and keeping putting this content out there. We're hoping to get on iTunes soon. We've got some new music. We're going to get some graphic design soon. Really coming up in the world now, Stefan, aren't we?
It's coming together. Yeah, one piece at a time. One piece at a time.
We're really proud of ourselves. But we're hoping that you're really enjoying this stuff and that, we can start to build this thing, build this idea of getting better as naturalists together through this podcast and through other things too. So, yeah, just super, super excited. Just wanted to update a little bit for each episode moving forward on where we're at. And, yeah.
Great.
So, you've got a story for me, don't you?
Yeah, I've got a little... Before we get into Algonquin stuff, I wanted to share a little story from this morning. It represented so well, I think, some of the points that we are trying to explore on this podcast, and the story begins with me this morning. I was going out, loading some stuff into my truck. And there was freezing rain. It was kind of raw and nasty, and but the birds were, doing their thing. They were active. It was about 9:30 a.m. So birds were active. There's a couple of I have feeders. My neighbors have feeders, and there's some good bird activity: chickadees, nuthatches, woodpeckers, some finches, and as always, blue jays. There are blue jays out. And they've been making a ruckus recently. And oddly, I heard a red-winged blackbird. And this is... What's today?
Today is the 27th, I believe. So
27th of March. And we've had sort of a kind of a weird, lingering winter. And where I live in Sandwich, we haven't had red-winged blackbirds yet, to my knowledge. And so this would actually be my first spring bird migrant arrival in my hometown. And man, it was I heard a red-winged blackbird, and just exactly the classic congaree, the congaree, and even some of the little check kind of noises. So. It was wild and very very noisy, like red-winged blackbirds are.
I feel like I know where this story's going.
Okay,
possibly.
Okay, so remember, the scene. It's raw.
Yeah,
it's nasty. There's no open water in Sandwich right now. It's still the death throes of winter, and it just isn't adding up. And so I go. It's kind of across my neighbor's yard. And then on the other side of their driveway into the next neighbor over into their yard. And it's in some big white pines. And that's kind of where I zeroed in on it. And so I go over, I have my binoculars. My glasses are getting spattered with freezing rain. My binoculars are getting spattered with freezing rain. And I'm trying to pinpoint the source of this sound because I just cannot believe this is a red-winged blackbird.
Yeah. And
so what do you think, Matt? What is it?
Well, so I used to live in a old farmhouse building that was on top of a hill, and there were lots of fields around, and there was tons and tons of starlings that nested in the roof, and they would flock, and every morning they would flock around all winter, and oftentimes I would hear them making, especially towards the spring, but all winter, congaree kind of red-winged blackbird sounds, and then eventually phoebe sounds. That's a flycatcher. All kinds of sounds. They're mimics. There's a few birds that mimic other birds, and tons of other things actually, like car alarms and all kinds of weird stuff. So when you were describing that, I was picturing starling. I don't know if that's correct, but I was picturing a flock of starlings, possibly.
So here's where I'm going with this. My conclusion so far is that it was the Blue Jays
Oh, nice.
The jays have been so active and so vocal, and they were just,
Wow.
I had them, several of them. It wasn't just one bird doing this. There were several jays up in these couple of pines, in this little, thin sort of copse in between two yards, and they were hanging around, up above where all these other little birds were feeding, and they were making this red-winged blackbird sound. So similar to like the starling, they're mimics.
Yeah.
And I've been, the thing that made me suspicious, I think, from the get-go was that they've been doing broadwing imitations a lot recently, and they can almost fool me. But they're not. They don't quite have the vocal capacity to really get the broadwing thing going. But the red-winged blackbird, they were spot on.
Huh.
And so,
interesting.
So I guess it's a cool story. But what it boils down to is this one main question that I'm left with, which is why.
Why would they do that?
So they'll imitate a hawk. They'll imitate red-tailed hawks. They're famous for that. They'll imitate the broadwings. And you can stipulate, what you think that might.
Yeah, definitely they use those hawk sounds. I mean, there's really I've seen this many times where they make the sound near a bird feeder, and then all the other birds who are at the bird feeder ditch the feeder, and then the blue jay comes in, no problem.
And gorgeous,
totally.
Yeah.
And actually, I saw out by my landlord's chickens. I pulled up the other day. And I heard this broadwing, and I was like looking around in the sky, and I was like, it could be a blue jay, but where's the blue jay? And I couldn't see a blue jay, and then all of a sudden I saw this blue jay just absolutely still right above the chickens doing the hawk call, and I don't know why exactly it was doing it there. Maybe to scare them away and then get their feed, but I don't know. Anyway, they do it all the time. I've actually never heard of them doing a red-winged blackbird call before, though.
So yeah, I mean that's really like you said. There's some instances where it's clear that there was a motive for the mimic.
Yeah,
but with this
pretty obvious.
With this red-winged blackbird imitation thing, what's the motive? That's where I'm just puzzling over that. What do they have to gain? And they were really going for it. Like it wasn't just like sort of like a one-off. It was repeated, sustained red-winged blackbird imitation for a period. I observed them for a period of 10 minutes.
Yeah, I don't know. Is there a marsh nearby where red-winged blackbirds are going to be breeding or anything like that?
So there's a lot of wetland in Sandwich. There isn't, to my knowledge, any sort of a pond or anything like I would expect.
Yeah.
That was another clue that something wasn't right.
The habitat was just wrong.
They don't have like a little duck pond in their backyard, or there isn't anything nearby. There's a mile or so away. There there's.
But it was like woods. Was it field?
It's it's sort of like rural housing area where there's like lawns. Houses with big yards and some attached adjacent meadows and strips of woods in between yards and things it's like tick habitat.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've never heard of doesn't mean they don't, but I've never heard of blue jays imitating red-winged blackbirds. I bet they do, though. And it definitely begs the question of, why the hell are they doing it? And, from like a Darwinian sort of strictly energy gain, energy out system, you're thinking, well, what are they getting from it?
Right. Yeah.
What benefit can they get from it? Yeah. I mean, I'm not I don't buy into that being 100% of the picture 100% of the time. Mm-hmm. But it is as in everything's always trying to reproduce or get food 100% of the time. Like every action is based around those things. In a sort of Darwinian sense. Yeah,
and I don't fully buy. I agree. I don't think.
I think you have to leave open the door for something else, other possibilities,
and especially with corvids, it's one of the groups
wacky.
where you expect that sort of extracurricular kind of behavior.
So that's why I was asking about were there other places where they might nest close by? Because I'm wondering. Here's you want my wacky theory?
Yeah, I'd like to hear your wacky theory.
This is my wacky theory.
I always appreciate your wacky
theories.
Right,
I've got many. But on this, So for this one, I'm thinking, okay, what if This time of year, a lot of birds are practicing vocalizations.
Sure.
So it makes me wonder if maybe they're practicing for something else. So why would they be practicing? Maybe blue jays use some sort of mimicry to mess around with mating pairs of blackbirds to throw them off guard, and then other ones swoop in and get eggs or some kind of situation where they're able to manipulate blackbirds in such a way where they're able to get eggs or chicks or something like that. And then maybe you caught them practicing before they're
getting ready for the spring.
Yeah. So we should definitely follow up on that, and maybe we should go back there, or you should go back there and see if and just sit out there one morning or something and see if the blue jays are in there.
If they're still doing it.
Of course, like, it's probably the kind of thing where they only do it for like a week. You know what I mean? Like, there's like a week window where the red-winged blackbirds are just chest thumping and are totally susceptible to that kind of stuff, and they have eggs at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Just a wacky theory from Matt.
Wacky theory. So. Well, thanks. And yeah, I definitely found it pretty interesting.
Yeah, we'll have to follow up on that. All right, thanks, Stefan.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
You're the best.
All right, so that brings us to our show topic. The topic of the day is stories from Algonquin Park, and we're going to be using these stories to touch on some important points around the practice of naturalizing out of your element. So, taking the skills and practices that you use in your home turf, in your own backyard, as it were, and taking those skills and transferring them, or maybe adjusting them, fine-tuning them to use in far-flung, or maybe not so far-flung, but somewhere away that is different from what you're familiar with.
Yeah, I think it's a time-tested skill of naturalists, is like traveling to different lands and where there are different species, different ecologies and stuff, and bringing those back and relating them to where you are, and learning about, you know, the massive diversity that's in the world of places and animals and plants and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so we have a few takeaways that we'll get to, but the way this is going to work is that Stefan's been to Algonquin Park in Canada. He's going to explain more on that, but I'm going to actually interview him, and I've got a bunch of questions here, and I'm going to try and get some answers from him. But these questions are kind of pointed in the direction of what the best way is to maybe learn about a place when you're traveling as a naturalist. So, with that, should we dive in?
Yeah, let's go for it. Fire away.
So, Stefan, why don't you tell me a little bit about Algonquin Park and set the table for me a little bit.
Context.
Okay,
so I went with a group of naturalists, trackers, folks from a lot of different walks of life, but all sharing this common interest in learning about the natural world, and it was a guided expedition, and we went to Algonquin Provincial Park in Ontario, sort of good bit north of the population centers of Ontario, maybe a couple hours north, I would say, of like Toronto area. And we went to Algonquin. We were there for like 8 days in February, which is normally very snowy, full-blown winter.
Deep winter.
Time of the year. And interestingly, this same trip has been run there for a couple of decades.
Right.
And they've seen a lot of different stuff over the years, according to one of the guides who's been doing it that long, and the other guide who's been doing it almost as long. And but I think this may have been the warmest warmest trip that they had seen, and it was a strange. We had the same kind of warm spell down here during that same period. We had just gotten like a big dumping of snow, a couple of feet of fresh powder, and then it was followed by this crazy week, more than a week of really warm weather and a bunch of melting. And so I was there. I was preparing for this trip and thinking about how cold it was going to be up in northern Ontario in Algonquin Park, up on the granite dome, and all their crazy snowfall and all this, and I didn't hardly use any of my extra layers or anything like that. So anyway, it was unseasonably warm for this place at this time.
So tell me a little bit about the ecology of the place. Like, if you had never heard about Algonquin Park and you were suddenly there, what would you see? What kind of plants and animals are there?
So Ontario, south of the park and sort of immediately east and west of the park, is different from the park itself, and there's a couple of factors involved. There's elevation, which, even though the park isn't really that highly situated by, in terms of like mountain standards,
elevation,
just that little, because of where it is latitude wise, just that couple thousand feet up on that high granite dome is enough that it influences not just the climate but also the weather that they get there. They get more precipitation,
more snow,
and so with those factors, you have this sort of like pocket of different plants, species, and
then would be in the surrounding.
Would be in the area around the park.
That's pretty cool.
And even within the park, there's a couple of sort of distinct ecological zones. On the east side of the park, there's a lot of, it's more like dry and piney. They've got red pine there, jack pine, which is a cool one. It's kind of like our pitch pine. It fills the same ecological role, and white pine. So there's the piney forest, and then over on the west side of the park, there's a lot more like northern hardwood forest. Sugar maple, yellow birch, American beech. There's
Vermonti.
Some oak. But what's interesting is you're kind of on the cusp of where some of these things start to drop away as you move farther north. So there's north of the park, there's no oak, and this is a lot of stuff that I haven't seen for myself, but have picked up from talking to, especially one of the guides who lives in Ontario. So asking a lot of questions about how far north does American beech go? Stuff like that.
So it's kind of like on the edge of the northern hardwood forest
and the boreal
forest.
Yeah. So I was getting to that. The Algonquin Park is famous for the spruce bog, the black spruce bog, and there's so within these the western sort of hardwood zone and then the eastern pine zone, there's also these spruce bogs sort of scattered throughout, and there's just like tons of waterways and all this really just neat, vast wilderness area. And there's spruce trees. Interestingly, not a lot of red spruce. I was looking around for red spruce. I was thinking like, oh, we'll have the big three.
Wonder if it's the elevation stuff.
I don't know. But the thing is, you see red spruce in the whites.
But the whites have elevation, though.
But I'm saying there isn't a lot of red spruce at Algonquin.
But you see red spruce in the whites, but you don't see them in Algonquin?
Right. Anyway, there are these spruce bogs, and it's a lot of black spruce, and then the other spruce tree that they have there in abundance is white spruce.
Right. Yeah.
There are little pockets, apparently, of red spruce in the park, but it's not as nearly as abundant as it is out east here. I think it's an eastern trait.
So, tell me about. So, there's definitely a lot of wildlife there. So, paint me the wildlife picture.
So you've got the sort of forest communities, and within that there's all the animal residents, and they've got deer in the summer that move out in the winter.
Right,
So part of the year deer are in the park, and part of the year it would be very unusual to see deer in the park at all, which is kind of a neat dynamic there. Moose, the smaller stuff. There are beavers.
It's like North Woods.
Yeah.
kind of ecology.
Yeah, beavers, a whole slew of mustelids. They've got river otter, mink, marten, which is a cool one. That's sort of like, to us, that's, we associate that with the boreal.
For sure.
Fisher, and the smaller weasels, too. They've got flying squirrel. Interestingly, they, for a long time, thought they only had northern flying squirrel, but through some studies that they were doing there on the flying squirrels, they discovered that actually they had both, and in some places there was like almost no northern flying squirrels, it was all southern.
And Algonquin Park is an amazing hub of science or ecological research.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's just so much cool stuff going on there.
Yeah, the research station where we were staying, where we were kind of based out of, there's been a gray jay research project.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Going there since the 60s. Continuous gray jay research.
So awesome.
I think Dan Gardoki, one of the guides, told me that it was, to his understanding, it was the longest running, continuously running vertebrate research project.
I think I've heard that, from other people too, about that specific project, and so much cool stuff has come out of it. I mean, they're doing it right.
Man.
That's the way it should be done.
Yeah, and it's cool.
They're doing it right. It's long-term, like, methodical research, asking questions for the long term. That's the way it's got to be done.
Yeah, and it's reflected in the park visitors too. Like there's such a focus on like learning and observing.
Yeah.
In the park that you don't see that everywhere.
Definitely.
Some parks that's not the focus.
But did we touch on the highlight of the park? Everybody's.
Of course. The wolves.
Right. Yeah.
Algonquin Park is home to pretty core population of what they're calling, depending on who you ask, it's the eastern wolf.
Right.
And there's this new
Canid soup thing.
This new thing coming on the scene where they're now at least some schools of thought are calling it the Algonquin wolf. And my understanding is that, to me, it's like, I don't care what you call it. It's what has happened in Algonquin Park, or what is believed to have happened, is that there were the eastern wolves, maybe like red wolf, like what they have. There's a small pocket left down southeastern United States somewhere.
North Carolina, I think.
They were at the I don't know, 200 years ago. They were across the entire eastern part of the continent, and when the coyote came across from the southwest, there was some interbreeding. So the genetic stock has kind of been altered. And
they've mixed with the timber wolf,
and
too.
then, on the northern side of the park, there's interbreeding, upward interbreeding size-wise with the gray wolf or the timber wolf.
Yeah.
So there's some... It's almost like this conduit of genetics between some a coyote, which would not interbreed with a gray wolf, and but there's like,
and that's why they call it the canid soup, right?
Yeah,
that's what I've heard it referred to.
Yeah, canid soup.
Cool. Well, I think that sets the stage pretty well. So, my first question is,
wait, Matt, I want to mention something real quick. I was struck by the size of the taxidermied wolves that they had in the visitor center there.
Oh yeah.
I went there, I think it was like the second day I was there, so I hadn't really been out, and seen much yet. But they had this awesome visitor center, and there was a lot of taxidermy animals. And this one diorama that they had, the wolves looked a lot like what I consider to be a coyote. I was surprised by that. And then, later on in the trip, I learned more about this whole ongoing debate about what is what as far as the this whole canid soup thing. So anyway, that was just they can be, there's a lot of variation, and they can be not really much different from an eastern coyote, which is a big coyote. Yeah.
So my first question is here, what are some of the ways that you prepare for a trip like this as a naturalist? So, you're going to this place that in many ways is pretty different than where you're from. there's a lot of similar species, but pretty different ecology, pretty different overall bigger picture kind of stuff. And of course, you've got the wolves. So what are some of the ways that you, as a naturalist, put some time in beforehand to get ready for a trip like that?
Yeah, good question. One of the things that I find helpful is finding out what is going to be, what you can expect to see there. In this instance, I was going on this trip. This was a trip for, the study of natural history, or but oftentimes when we're traveling and we have opportunities to practice as naturalists, it's not necessarily the focus of the trip. So if you're going for business or to see family, whatever it is, maybe spend a little bit of time first to brush up on what you can expect to find in the place that you're going to.
Yeah.
And I think that's great because it kind of patterns you on some of the things that you might see. Maybe you'll see the animal. Maybe you'll be a little bit more familiar at how to recognize the sign or tracks relative to what you see in your area. So just getting a general idea of what you can expect to have an opportunity to observe while you're there. Is tremendously helpful in to have that in advance. So you're not spending all that time while you're there. You have probably limited time while you're in the place itself. You're not spending your time getting familiar with those things that you can easily do before you go, and you're spending that time making further observations more in depth. Asking more complicated questions, and
for sure.
It gives you a little springboard.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this before we recorded, but that one of the things that's important is being able to focus on a specific group, maybe, especially in areas where you are going to completely new territory and everything or almost everything is new. It can be so overwhelming that we want to recommend to people that it's a great idea to just, all right, choose plants. I'm going to learn all about the plants before I go, and that way I hit the ground running when I get there, and I know a bunch of species, and I'm ready to start learning more right when I hit the ground. Yeah,
birds. Like we've discussed this when you go away. Oftentimes for both you and I, seeing birds that you can't see at home is kind of like a draw.
Definitely, birds are the main one for me. Like my stance on plants is that I really, in my lifetime, I want to know all the plants of where I live, and I'm making good progress. But I really want to know like all 1,500 species in Maine, and know them well. But I kind of, when I travel to other places, I just kind of take it off the table almost. And I know families, and maybe we'll probably cover this at some point in a podcast.
I think so.
But knowing families really helps. But other than that, I'm all about the birds.
Yeah. But that's good, because then when you're out there, maybe you're picking out plant families, you're noticing where things that are similar to what you're familiar with are growing, and but then you're spending a lot of your time and energy getting a lot out of the birding that you're doing there too. So to kind of give yourself a break on not being able to do it all.
Definitely. And there's people who would do the reverse, where they would focus on the plants, or maybe it's mammals, or maybe it's like insects even.
And it's up to you. And maybe if you tend to go birds, maybe next time you're away, go plants, cool, or go do something else. Because
it's almost like when you travel, it's like you become like a little bit more of a specialist. I definitely think of naturalists as generalists, big time generalists.
Oh yeah,
because what are we not interested in as far as nature? But when we travel, it's cool to like specialize a little bit and get some more value out of your time in that way. And definitely picking a group, I think, is key. Picking one field guide to learn, stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's another thing to prep in advance. Is finding out, go online, get on the forum and find out what people who are there, for whom that is their home turf. Find out what field guide they're using for the category that you're going to zone in on. Find out what bird guide they use. Find out what
sometimes there's
wildflower
like
guide
5 bird guides, for instance, and you want to know which one's the best. And for instance, I had a friend who just went to Hawaii, and I got her a field guide, but there was like 5 different field guides, and it just took a lot of figuring out, being like, all right, which one's the best one?
Yeah.
It's not easy sometimes.
At home, you know which guide you reach for when you're out in the field. Like, you know which guide you like as a reference book at home.
Yeah.
To come back. Seriously, some books are designed to be used in the field, and so, but it's not always clear. You know, field guides aren't always designed to be used in the field.
Definitely. Yeah.
So
it's funny. It's almost like doing research on research.
Yeah, you got to do a little research on your research.
I don't know. I guess that's a good one.
But before you go, don't spend your valuable time while you're out there sorting through and figuring out which field guide works for you, or worst case scenario, don't end up with the one that isn't the right one for you, just because you didn't spend a little bit of time in advance to get the one that works best.
So this is a good segue, because I'm interested in maybe hearing some little snippets and little vignettes on what your species of interest were in Algonquin.
Yeah, so I was definitely going into it thinking about wolves, but there's the caveat of sometimes you don't see wolves. It's not like it's not a circus. Elusive. It's not a circus. So with this one, sometimes it's the animal that finds you, or maybe it's the plant that you keep coming back to. And so for me on this trip, it's funny because I kind of had this vague idea that I was like interested in seeing some mustelid activity, and I lucked out because there was some great mustelid action.
Briefly, just explain, what is a mustelid?
Oh, sure, yeah. Mustelid is the weasel family.
Is it pronounced moostelid?
Not by anyone I know.
I have a quick story about that someday. Let's come back to that.
Okay.
All right, back to the mustelid.
Okay, so yeah. Anyway, mustelid. So there was a lot of martin activity around. First day we arrived, there was a martin like right up by the research station. Martin tracks all over the place, which is cool because martin is a mustelid that we don't have here on the seacoast. Up where I live, in the mountains, we have it, which is cool. But there was also some fisher activity, but the best piece the cream of the mustelid crop was some awesome river otter sightings, and just long session of observing a river otter going down through the ice on the river there behind the research station, going down through into the ice and coming back up with a fish and sitting on the ice and eating the fish. So a couple of them, it was like a lot of small ones, like the little fish that you couldn't really see.
Yeah.
But then there were a couple times came up with a nice, like, 10-inch trout.
Like a little trout?
And pulled that thing up out and just
we would
munched on it. Oh, yeah, keeper.
Yeah.
Just would sit there and munch, and they munch the whole thing down. They're just industrious feeders. Like,
the mustelid family.
Yeah,
they just pound food, and
it was really neat. And one thing I was paying attention to was the question that came to me was like, how long can they hold their breath?
Nice.
And I wondered about that, and I thought somebody, there's probably some sort of a statistic on that. But I wonder really if anyone has done any research on that. It's kind of hard to get. I would think it would be hard to design an experiment around it. So it's definitely one of those things that it's a question that a naturalist could spend some time.
It's like the question we're finding is kind of like, what's the average time that a river otter spends underwater?
Yeah. But anyway, so
cool. So river otters, species of interest.
Yeah, and a lot of good. Yeah, just mustelids in general were.
So you touched on it a little bit in the beginning, but anything about naturalist culture in Algonquin Park that you want to speak to?
Yeah, I did. Like I said, I was struck by the nature of the I guess the way that the people were using their park.
Yeah.
And there's no like gimmickry in Algonquin Park. It's a park like in its.
There's no water slides.
No, not at all. There's no there's nothing to like make it more entertaining or appealing to a broader
That's interesting.
group. But at the same time, there's a lot of people coming to this park. Even in February, in the dead of winter, when it was warm, but it wasn't that warm, and there were a lot of people using this park, which was great, and they were using it in a way that was tended towards observation and sort of learning with the intent to better understand,
as opposed to maybe like recreating.
Yeah, no, it was much more, and I'm guessing it changes from season to season. I know canoeing is a big thing in the park in the summer, but in the winter, maybe it's just the diehards that are there. But in the winter, there's this culture of learning, really, and coming to the park and learning and just having these experiences that are really deep and meaningful, and taking away a better understanding of the plants and animals.
It makes me wonder about, because you started with talking about how the space is treated in a way that leaves it less like entertainment factor.
It's uncluttered,
and I wonder if there's something about that allows for people to be more in the observational space.
Yeah,
I don't know. Just wanted
like the way you build it, the way you present it.
Yeah,
it will maybe influence the way that people come and use that space.
Yeah, interesting. But I know that there's also, like we were talking about the research too. There's all these. There's so much research going on in Algonquin. There's a lot of just really, really good naturalists, and in Ontario in general has a really amazing naturalist culture.
Mm-hmm. And that Algonquin, I believe, is like the flagship park
for sure
of the Ontario park system.
Yeah, they have the did you see the bird atlas of Ontario? Did you see that while you were there?
I don't think so.
Well, you should check that out. And any place that has a bird atlas is a little ding, 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 ding for a place that has some crazy naturalists, like crazy good naturalists. Crazy naturalists!
Insane naturalists!
But seriously, bird atlases are incredible. It's basically a really in-depth look at where you can find specific birds and what time and what sightings are, even extremely rare sightings, and it's on a micro scale.
Yeah,
like that makes you blows your mind a little bit.
Is this like published in book form?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I totally saw.
I think it has a spruce grouse.
Yes.
On the front.
Yes, and it's like red.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful, and there's whispers of one for Maine in the next couple of years, but it takes at least 10 years to make it.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying it's like the little ding 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 of there's some seriously dedicated people.
Yeah.
Because it's no small feat, and it's quite an incredible book. But let's keep going here. I got one more question about Algonquin before we wrap up. So, what were some of your takeaways as a naturalist from your time at Algonquin? Some things that you're going to bring back with you here to New Hampshire and Maine, and that are going to enrich your naturalizing at home.
I think one of my takeaways from this trip, which is something that I continue to learn and is just reinforced, is that spending time doing this stuff alone has a certain value, and that's that.
Yeah. Spending
time doing this sort of thing with other naturalists has a certain value, and one is not superior to the other, but I feel like it's important to acknowledge that there's something in, and especially this expedition was a group. There was a lot of group time for me. For me, the way it was geared and the way I chose to spend my time there was with others, and what I gained from that was a window into all these other people's perspective on the stuff that we were seeing, and I found there was so much value in that. It was so rich to see other people's processes and to discuss it with them, but also even just to watch them and how they would proceed with a mystery that they were tackling. As we would go out and people would be taking samples, taking twigs, taking leaves, and bringing them back. And there's like the little mobile library, and people would be some of them were things that was like, nobody knows what that is, or some of it's like, some people do, but they're not going to tell you. And and so there's
some strong naturalist culture within that group.
Yeah, being in the culture, and it's not about it's not just about being around like really experienced naturalists. It's about being around naturalists with different experience.
Sounds like the Triforce was going pretty strong.
There was a lot of active Triforce.
Totally.
Yeah. There. Yes. Oh man.
It goes back to the whole thing of it's not about what you know. It's about the process.
Yeah.
And doing that with other people is the best. That's when all that storytelling's happening, sharing of observations, and those questions that you might not think about a question, and someone else might pop with a question that's just like, whoa, that is awesome. I want to research that.
Yeah.
That's cool. So I like that takeaway being solo time and the group time.
Yeah, and I feel like that's if I were to if I had to choose my most powerful takeaway from that particular trip, that would be it.
Nice. Cool. So I think that's going to pretty much wrap us up for this episode. Thank you, Stefan, for sharing a little bit on Algonquin.
Yeah, thanks for asking some good questions.
And I hope that this has been helpful to you in some way as you travel about and naturalize out of your element. A few of the takeaways that we did write down for you were, and just to go back to what we went through, was focus on a group of organisms that you're going to be studying while you're there, so you don't get overwhelmed by everything. Second, tap into the local knowledge. A place like Algonquin has so much local knowledge, but anywhere you go, there's going to be people that know a lot about their area. It could even be a gas station attendant. It doesn't have to be some crazy epic naturalist. Naturalist!
That gas station attendant might be a crazy birder.
Yeah. You might be a crazy birder, might know like something that they might not even think is valuable information, but to you is pure gold. So I guess we're encouraging people to tap into to any local knowledge that you can. And the last thing is, go solo and go in a group. So go by yourself sometimes, but also make sure you go with other people.
Yeah.
And
make time for both of them.
So with that, hoping that was of some help to you. And if you want to shoot us an email, if you have anything to add, subtract, multiply, divide from what we're offering here, go ahead and send it to us at naturalisticspod@gmail.com. So that's going to wrap us up.
All right. Awesome.
See you later.